we choose by faith to believe that we can be reconciled to God through the death and resurrection of Christ, we enter into the flock. He's our shepherd.
Welcome to this episode of The French Press. Let me pour you a cup of coffee while we talk about intrigues of faith, pages we've dog-eared, and the life in between on The French Press.
Welcome back to this episode of The French Press, where we talk about books I've read, intrigues of faith, and the life in between. Thank you for joining me today. I know there are a lot of podcasts you could be listening to, and I love that you chose to listen to this one. Your support means so much to me. I love doing this ministry, and I really appreciate when you guys write to me or tell me that you love to listen and that you share it. And it's really hard to self-promote. Being a writer and now a podcaster, it's a lot of self-promotion, and I really am uncomfortable in that arena. So it's hard for me to ask, like, oh, can you guys give it a like? Can you guys give it a 5-star review? Can you share it? Can you repost it? But it really is necessary for the ministry to grow and just to get it, in front of people, because the platforms will push it more if it has more likes or shares, or even if you save it. I think that helps push it. And it is a ministry. And I'm doing this for the Lord. So I try to not think of it as self-promotion, but just, hey, here's a ministry I'm doing. Can you support it through shares and likes? And I know we have to support little ministries, and mine is just one more in the mix that you could support. I love if you pray over the ministry. I'm trying to be a little more bold this year and talk about some more topics. Last year I played it pretty safe just because it was such a big giant learning experience. And so I kept my topics pretty safe, and I'd like to venture out into some other areas. When it comes to the Bible, some of the maybe stickier areas where different denominations interpret it differently, or some of the gray fringier areas where you're like, what does this mean? I enjoy that part of the Bible. And I wouldn't want to talk just about that, but I would like to talk about it more. And I actually started a little last week. I said I'm going to be a little bolder, and I talked about a book that a year ago when I started this podcast, I would have never talked about, because it pushes the envelope a little bit more. It makes you think a little differently. And not that I agree with everything about it, but I was like, this is something interesting. And I like to talk about the interesting, challenging things, even with people that think differently. I think it's kind of fun. It's good. It's that iron sharpens iron. So I did that last time a little bit, and I've actually had a great response from it. Several of you have written me and said you really enjoyed the episode, and a few of you told me you shared it and you're going to have your students listen to it just because it brought up some ideas that are interesting to think about and talk about. And that means so much to me. So thank you for telling me that. Appreciate it so much. Something I hear back a lot from people that listen is that it feels like we've had a conversation. It feels like we've hung out. And I love that, because part of the mission statement of this podcast is to provide companionship and provide maybe something to listen to and learn from and be challenged from in the times in your life where maybe you couldn't get together with somebody because you're driving, or you're going on a walk, or you're doing chores, or maybe you work from home like I do and you're a little more isolated. And it's just nice to have someone to, quote unquote, talk to. But a lot of you tell me you do answer me back, and you do talk back to the podcast, which I love. So that is what I hope it provides. Thank you for telling me when it does. And I do want it to feel like we're having a conversation, like we're friends and we're meeting up. And hey, these are the books I'm reading. This is the stuff I'm studying in the Bible. What do you think about this? And I'd like to just introduce some more topics, as we go along. Scout, as you can hear, does not care for boldness. Scout would rather we kept it safe. He likes to just feel safe. He's an agoraphobic. He does not want to leave the house. He doesn't want to go for walks. He doesn't want to get in the car. He just likes to play it really safe. So he does not care for the direction this podcast is going. But hopefully you do. Hopefully you're not afraid to venture into some new territories. But that said, I'm not planning to change the whole venue here. Just sprinkle it in here and there. And so I'm going to come back to just a lovely little book. It's a book about writers and booksellers and just the love of literature, which is also another part of this podcast for me, is that I love literature and I love sharing it and I love talking about it. I'm in a book club and I do studies or Bible studies, and I'm always reading a million books. Books are my favorite gift to give and to get. I love stopping by a free little library. I can just get free books, which is amazing. And this book that I just finished reading is called 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff. Okay, it's actually Helene, I think, Helene Hanff. And it takes place in, I think, starting in the late 1940s, going up to like the late 1960s. So it spans like 20 years. It's a true story. It's a correspondence between an American writer and this little bookstore in England. And she writes screenplays. The one thing I'd heard of that she wrote, I'm not familiar with a lot of like television stuff in the 70s, or 60s, I should say. But she did write for Hallmark Hall of Fame movies. I used to love those as a kid. One of my favorite movies was called One Against the Wind. I absolutely loved it. It was like a World War II movie, but it was inspirational, usually true stories. Anyways, I love those. So she wrote for those. That's kind of where I can place her. So she's an American writer, screenwriter, and she's looking mostly for all these reference books. And she figures out there's this little used bookstore in England where she can get them inexpensively. And they're actually really like beautiful copies. They're gilded covers and lovely fly leaves and rich buttery pages versus what she could get in New York City, which were renditions and they just weren't very nice, but they cost twice as much. So she ends up figuring out she can order these books at a quarter of the cost, but they're actually amazing. So to her, this is like this little gem. She finds this little bookstore and she starts asking them to send her all these things. And they're sort of unusual. I haven't heard of a lot of the books she's looking for. And I think they're references for her writing. So it's a lot of classics, like classics I haven't heard of. And she's looking for a lot of religious texts and just different things like that. And they're kind of hunting them down for her and then sending them to her. And they start corresponding back and forth. And she realizes that in England, still at this time period, they were still on food rations from the war. And they actually had a hard time finding food, which blows my mind. I didn't realize that was still happening that much later after the war. And she figures out that she can actually order them food, I want to say from Holland, and have it sent to them for almost nothing. It's like a couple dollars, and she can send them these food baskets that they apparently can't get, but she can order them in America from Holland or Denmark and send them to them. And she starts sending them these food baskets, and they are just overwrought because they have not been able to get eggs and sugar and butter, and it's things they can hardly ever get their hands on. And she starts sending them these gifts, and they're just like, don't spend your money on us, don't do this. And she's like, no, it costs like nothing, it's no big deal, I'm happy to do it. And it's just really sweet. And they all start writing her letters, and she starts corresponding with all the different employees, and they just start telling her things about their lives, and she talks about her life. And she saved all these letters and published them in this book. It's actually been made into a movie also, which I've heard is great. I haven't watched it, but I'm planning to, so I'll let you know. And this correspondence back and forth is just so sweet. It's very moving. She's also very funny, so it's funny, but it's moving, and how appreciative they are of this complete stranger in America is sending them these food baskets, and they save them for the holidays. And they're like, oh, we're going to save this sugar for so-and-so's birthday, or we're going to save these eggs and make a cake for the holidays. And at one point, one of the employees or his wife is very ill, and the rest of the shop gives them all the extra food so she can have nourishment. I mean, it's just delightful and sweet. But Helene loves books, and she loves marking them up, which of course made me think of myself. And I always talk about how much I love to mark up books. And if you've lent me a book, it takes everything I have to not grab my pen and mark it up. I'm always reaching for a pen or a highlighter. And my son's like, wait, whose book is that? I'm like, oh yeah, okay, it's the library's, or oh yes, it's not mine. If we're really good friends and you've given me a book, I'm probably marking it up as we speak. You should just know that. And that means I think our relationship is secure enough that I can mark up your books. But you tell me not to, I won't do it. And then I have all these little stickies I use. But she talks in several spots about how much she loves to mark up books. And I just relate to her so much. She says here, you leave me sitting here writing long marginal notes in library books that don't even belong to me. Someday they'll find out I did it and take away my library card. I have been tempted to underline in a library book. I have not done it, but it is so tempting. She says, I wish you hadn't been so over courteous about putting the inscription on a card instead of the flyleaf. It's the bookseller coming out in all of you. You were afraid you'd decrease its value. You would have increased it for this present owner, and possibly for the future owner. I love inscriptions on flyleaves and notes and margins. I like the camaraderie sense of turning pages someone else has turned. I love that too. I get a lot of used books. I find a lot of free books. And I love when people have written in them or underlined them. One of the Bibles I'm using right now is a used Bible. And it's really interesting for me to see what that person underlined. I mean, I just love it. It does feel like you're sharing a book. A friend of mine right now, we have a couple books we're sharing, and we both agreed we could mark them up and then we would like trade the books. And so it's kind of fun. I feel like I'm highlighting and underlining things, knowing she's going to be reading it next. And I remember one year when I was a camp counselor, my mom would send me like care packages, and she would send me magazines, and she would go through them and make all these little notes in the magazines like, oh, we should try this recipe, or oh, look at this beautiful dress, or whatever. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. It's like you're reading a magazine together. So I also love when books are marked up. She says, I shall sprinkle pale pencil marks through it, pointing out the best passages to some book lover yet unborn. And it's a cute little fast book, but I enjoyed the kindness of strangers, how they're corresponding and they're just in each other's lives, even though they've never met. And I think we don't really do that so much more. Some of us still write cards, but probably not with strangers. But maybe we text, maybe there's someone we haven't spent a lot of like personal time with, but maybe you kind of have a texting relationship, or maybe you've met somebody online. That's a popular thing today, and you've never actually met in person, but yet you sort of have this correspondence. And it is interesting the different ways people can connect, and just how much this relationship meant to both, well, this group of people at the bookstore and her. And when she would have friends going to England, she would tell them to go in the bookstore and leave them little gifts around the bookstore, and they would find it. And they would at times pool together and send her gifts. And it's just a sweet book about relationships and the human bond, and just that kindness, and just going out of your way to do even a small thing. I mean, maybe sending food's not a small thing in this case, but in our lives, just that small thing, just writing someone a card, sticking something in their mailbox, be like, oh, here's a book I read. I thought you might like it. Just thinking of somebody, taking a minute to tell someone, hey, you've been on my mind. Can I pray for you today? Or, hey, I read this and it made me think of you. I have a lot of friends that will send each other, pictures of pages of books we're reading, or maybe Bible verses, and just be like, hey, this made me think of you. It's a lovely way to stay connected in a very disconnected world. And there's a lot of people we don't get to see, we don't get to spend time with, but we can still have a connection with, and it can still be meaningful, just like it was for these people. So I recommend this book. It's really sweet. And it actually made me think of something I read in my Christian classics, 90 Days with the Christian Classics. This is my little kind of 1-2 page devotional I've been reading lately. I pulled a lot out of it. And there was one particular reading called Unseen Servants. So it made me think of how these people never meet, and yet they played such a part in each other's lives, and they just corresponded through the mail, essentially. This little talk is about being willing to love when only God knows it is the true virtue. And it pulls kind of out of Matthew. It says, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So the idea of just giving to give, she didn't send those food baskets and then be like, all right, you guys better send me some free books now. And in fact, they tried to. They were like, oh gosh, this is so lovely. Let us do something for you. And she was like, no, I want to do this. I don't want credit at your store for it. Like, I'm still going to pay full price. And they do send her some gifts, but it's just her heart is very much just like, I just want to do this. And what inspiration we can take to just do things for people without credit. And we do that. We do it as parents. We do it as spouses. We do it with our family. We just do things for our family without credit. But also for strangers, just doing things for people that maybe can't get back to you. They're just not capable. They don't have the resources. And you're just like, I'm just going to do this. And I'm going to get nothing out of it except the joy of giving, which she did. She loved giving those gift baskets or the food baskets. And that meant so much to her to be able to do that. And I think, are we willing to be unnoticed, unmentioned, unsung, unappreciated? Are we willing to do the things God calls us to do with no credit? That's hard. It's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to forgive this person. I want credit for this, or I'm going to help with this ministry, or I'm going to help fix the lights at church, or I'm going to clean, or I'm going to provide something. And to get credit for it's lovely. But what if there's no credit? Are we still willing to do the things knowing there won't be a lot of credit, or knowing there won't be a lot of accolades around it? This is written by Hannah Hurnard. And she talks about how things go unseen. And she says, I've often wondered about the wildflowers, she said. It does seem strange that such unnumbered multitudes should bloom in the wild places of the earth, where perhaps nobody ever sees them, and the goats and the cattle can walk over them and crush them to death. They have so much beauty and so much sweetness to give, and no one to whom to lavish it, nor who will ever appreciate it. She talks about how only the few understand all the fairest beauties in the human soul. Its greatest victories and its most splendid achievements are always those which no one else knows anything about. Many a quiet, ordinary, and hidden life unknown to the world. And she says that always their greatest victories are like the wildflowers, those which no one knows about it. So maybe there's someone doing something for you that you've kind of not noticed. Maybe there's someone that's like, gosh, they go out of their way to do this, or they are always reaching out to me and I don't feel like I can reach back to them. Just that giving without looking for anything back is such a beautiful form of friendship and kindness and love. And it's just emphasized in the 84 Charing Road book. And obviously it's taught in the Bible. And it's just something I think to think about as we look around at who can we do something kind for without getting something back. It's one thing to be like, hey, I'll babysit your kids and you'll babysit mine. It'll be great. If that's like a co relationship of giving, those are great too. But what if it's just one-sided? Are we still willing to do it? And that may be a measure of our heart, a measure of what are we really doing this for? Sometimes I do things because I think, well, I'll do this for you, but I need you to do it back for me. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a relationship we've entered into. But do I have places in my life that I'm just giving and not thinking I'm going to get anything back? So I just thought that all kind of went together really nicely. So another really sweet book I've been reading is James Herriot. He is one of my all-time favorite authors ever. I used to read him all the time when I was like a kid. I reread him in my young adult years, and I'm rereading him again now. He's a real person, and he wrote about his life. So they're true stories. They're not novels. And he was a veterinarian. I want to say in the 20s or 30s. I can't remember when his first book starts, but he's written several books that kind of span the life of him being a veterinarian in England. I think his first book is All Creatures Great and Small. And then he wrote All Things Bright and Beautiful, All Things Wise and Wonderful, The Lord God Made Them All. So he used those verses to name his books, and they kind of span the life of his career as a vet. The book I'm reading right now is one I picked up in a little free library. It's actually really cute. It's got lovely illustrations, and it has those nice, creamy, thick pages that Helene would appreciate. This feels like something they would send from England. It's a really lovely little gift book, but it's a grouping of some of his stories. So it's highlights from some of his books. So if you're more like, oh, okay, this sounds interesting, I'm not going to commit to a whole book, these are perfect. This one's called Animal Stories, and there's several of these. And he also does children's books that are like versions of his longer stories. But if you like to read, if you're a reader and you're looking for a good book, I recommend reading the series, which are longer, and just you could start with All Creatures Great and Small. Just one of my all-time favorite books. Many times people will ask me, what's your favorite book? And this is usually what I say, because it's just so lovely. He's such a good writer. There's such great stories. And I was reading the foreword of this book, which was written by his son, and he talked about how James Herriot really put veterinarians out there on the scene. And if you read the books, you'll see that they were very unappreciated. The farmers and the local people were like, oh, veterinarians, like, let's see what you can do. They were kind of like, not scoffed at, but they weren't revered, I think, the way they are today. Even when you think of doctors and you look back throughout history, at one time period, doctors, that was not a profession you wanted to go into for any notoriety, because they were kind of looked down on. It was like, oh, you're a doctor? And that's changed so much. Today we revere doctors and we're like, wow, you're a doctor. That's amazing. And I think the same with a veterinarian. Like if you meet someone today that's a veterinarian, you're like, wow, you must have such cool stories. What a cool profession. I feel like almost every kid at some point wants to be a veterinarian. I know I did. So he really is the one that sort of warmed us up to this profession. And you'll see if you read the books that nobody was excited for the veterinarian. They were kind of like, oh, you're here. Okay, I guess you can try to help me with this. So I thought that part was interesting in the introduction, just how he talks about how his dad sort of helped put them on the scene and make us love veterinarians. And he is just so beloved in his writing and in his style. So these are just little short stories. And the one I want to talk about today is called Herbert the Orphaned Lamb. And so it's lambing season, and Harriet talks about how you're so busy as a vet. And, he was a large animal vet to begin with. Later in his career, he actually discovers he prefers dogs and cats, and he ends up kind of opening a practice where most likely you would bring your pets to him. But when he was young and starting out, he was a livestock veterinarian. And so he goes out to the farm. So he's traveling all around England in all seasons, all times, and he's going out in the fields and he's delivering lambs and working with sick cows and horses. And it's not a very glamorous job, I can tell you that. And he describes that, although he loves it, he talks about how hard it is. And lambing season is particularly hard because it's so busy. He says you really don't do a lot with sheep throughout the year. You don't see them a lot. There's not a whole lot going on. But during lambing season, it's really busy and you see them all the time. So he was visiting this one particular farm over and over during one particular lambing season. And he just gets really familiar with the flock. And so the story has several stories that happen on the farm. You should read it. It's great. But I'm going to focus on Herbert, who is the orphan lamb. So one time James is out at the farm and there's this little orphan lamb running around and he notices it. And he kind of says to the farmer, what's up with this little lamb running around? And because typically if either the ewe dies or rejects their baby, which happens a lot, or maybe not a lot, happens, they're made into pet lambs or bottle babies. Now, my dad was a sheep farmer, so I grew up with sheep. I showed him 4-H. So I've worked with sheep a lot, and this would happen. Either a mother would reject her baby or the mother would die. and we would have bottle babies, and I would go feed them. This was probably like my absolute favorite job on the farm, was feeding the bottle babies. And they would become like little pets because you would essentially become their mother or their father. And some of them would follow me around like puppies, and I could take them out of the pen and we could just go all around the farm, and they would go everywhere with me, and I didn't even need to worry about them. And you could pet them, and they acted like little puppies and like little dogs. And when you get into some of those verses in the Bible that talk about Jesus being the good shepherd and us being the sheep, I think that gets lost on a lot of people because you aren't growing up. Because you aren't growing up on a farm, you lose some of the significance of this. And so I feel like this story highlights so much of that. If you are a little lost lamb, like if you've lost your mother or your mother's rejected you, you really need the shepherd, you need the farmer to take care of you, and you become very attached. And the analogy made in the Bible is that if you're someone that has been maybe rejected by your own parents, your own culture for various reasons, or you've lost family, you maybe didn't grow up with both your parents, that you need God all the more. And it's all the more of a special relationship. And when we go through hardships and hard times, there is the temptation to be mad and bitter and pull away from God. But really, what it can do and what's so beautiful is it can draw you to Him in a stronger, deeper way than somebody who maybe hasn't gone through some of those hardships. And I would think of those little bottle babies. They loved us. They were so close to us, the farmers, the shepherds, versus the babies that had their mother. They didn't really need us. Yeah, they might come up and like say hi at the fence, but they weren't going to follow me around. They weren't going to come play with me. They were a little bit afraid of me, where the bottle babies were my pets. And so James is asking the farmer, why is this baby running around out in the field? He should be in the pens with the pet lambs or the bottle babies. And the farmer says, well, he just is so happy out here in the field. He loves to be out in the field. I don't think he would enjoy being penned up. And he is kind of sneaking around and grabbing drinks of milk from these different ewes. So he kind of like runs up to one of the ewes and starts nursing. And then she realizes and butts him off. And then he runs to the next one. So this is how Herbert's surviving out in the field. He is just grabbing drinks of nourishment where he can before he gets like booted out, literally. So James takes note of him, and he's coming in and out of the farm, and they're dealing with different things. And he says a couple things about the shepherd that I think are really lovely, and the sheep. He says that in the lambs, all young animals are appealing, but the lamb has been given an unfair share of charm. And I do think that's true. I think baby lambs are one of the absolute cutest animals. And he talks about this farmer or this shepherd, and during lambing season, how close the shepherd has to stay to the flock and how he really doesn't do anything else. He is just always by the flock. And he says he was hard at it. At this time of the year, he didn't go to bed for about 6 weeks. He would maybe take off his boots and doze by the kitchen fire at night, but he was his own shepherd and never very far from the scene of action. And that just makes me think of God with us. He's always watching us. He's never far away. He's our shepherd, and he's taking care of us. And when we are his, when we choose by faith to believe that we can be reconciled to God through the death and resurrection of Christ, we enter into the flock. We enter into the fold, and God never takes his eyes off of us, and he's always watching us and keeping over us. And it made me think of Galatians, where it talks about how we are adopted by God, and how this bottle baby, Herbert, and the bottle babies that we had on our farm, how we just adopted them as pets. It was different than the rest of the flock. We cared for the rest of the flock, but we were loved by these little bottle babies, and we love them. And it says in Galatians 4, I'm paraphrasing here, how we are the children of the king. And the king is always the king, right? So when a king has a child, he is that child's father, but he's also that child's king. And we are essentially adopted by God. We're brought into the fold. We become his beloved. And he is always God and always our God. But we get this unique, special relationship with him when we choose by faith to come into belief and to be reconciled with him. We get to be his children and we are adopted in. And adoption is not just like, all right, you get to live in my house. It's like, no, you get to be my children. And as my children, you are heir to everything I have. And it's such a beautiful relationship. And I think of the relationship between the shepherd and these bottle babies or these pet lambs. And it's just such a beautiful relationship in that we get to have the Spirit of God in our hearts, which is how it's worded in Galatians 4. And we get to live under grace. And we're no longer set under the elements of the world with the cause and effects of the world. Yes, the cause and the effects of the world play out in our lives, of course, but we also get to sit under grace. And sometimes we get to have this grace come into our lives and it's like, oh gosh, this should have gone this way. But because of grace, because I'm adopted in by God, it actually went this way. And that is every single one of our stories, right? We are all born into sin. We all are ruled by sin until we choose God or he chooses us, whichever way you look at that. And then we are bought at a price and we are brought in not as servants, but as children, and children who want to serve the Lord, who want to bring forth his kingdom, but we are his children and his beloved. And I just think of the shepherd and the lambs and in this lovely little relationship, which is why we can do selfless giving, which is why when we look at like 84 Charing and she, could give the food to these people, it's that she had enough. She had enough. She's like, I have enough food. I can share. We have enough love from God that we can share. We've had enough forgiveness from God that we can give forth forgiveness. We've been given the fruits of the Spirit through the Lord, love and joy and peace. And no, we do not feel these things all the time in this flesh, but we have been given those things. And so we can therefore give them out to the world, not looking for something back. It's just that selfless giving like God gave us. And it's that spirit of adoption, that spirit of we are his children and his beloved, and we inherit. And we want other people to also feel this love and kindness, which is why we evangelize. And it's why we're kind. And it's why we want to bring forth the kingdom of light. And we want to step out from the kingdom of the enemy. We want to step out from the bondage of sin and the bondage of the world. And we want to come into the fold. It says in the word that we know the shepherd's voice. And how do we know his voice? It's because we grow close to him. We read his word, we talk to him in prayer, and we know who he is. So last time I talked about these dark thoughts we have, or these lies we believe, or the way the enemy sometimes whispers these things to us. But if we know the good shepherd and we know his voice and we know his tone and we know how he sounds, we can say, that's not God. That's not how he talks. That's not his promises. And I know that because I know his voice. I know the good shepherd, and he wants to nourish me and he wants to help me. And yes, does he have to discipline me sometimes? Absolutely. Just like you would do with a puppy. You don't just let them do whatever. You don't want them to run in the road and get hit. You don't want them to go to the bathroom in the house and ruin the house. Like, you train them in love. And you do the same with sheep. They're not maybe as trainable as a dog, but you don't want them to get hurt. You don't want them to run in the road. That's why we put fences up. That's why we gate them in, not to be cruel, but for their safety. And when sheep get out, and this would happen on our farm, the animals would get out and the neighbors would call and be like, there's a whole herd of sheep going down the road. And we'd run out and gather them back up because we love them. We want them in the pens where they're safe, where they're cared for. And we think of the Psalms and the verses where it's like, you make us to lie down in green pastures. You put us near rivers and ponds where our needs are met. That is what a sheep wants. They want to be safe. They want to lay down in green pastures. They want fresh water. They want to feel cared for. And the bottle babies, especially, because you're their parent. And so when we are someone who's, maybe we have a past, maybe we have some things in our background that we're like, ooh, that's really bad. but we know we're forgiven and we're all the more loved because we're all the more forgiven. And I think it's important to know the tone of the shepherd. I say this sometimes to like younger people I mentor. We mess up and then we want to kind of like beat ourselves up and be like, well, I'm so stupid, or why would I do that? And that's not the Lord's voice. He never wants to beat us up for our mistakes. He wants to say, hey, that hurt. That's going to hurt you. Come do it my way because it's better, because it's sweeter. He isn't going to browbeat you, but he is going to let you feel the heat of it, right? Because he cares. He's like, don't go over here. This is bad. Don't be in this relationship. This is going to hurt you. But his voice is kind, and it brings you back because he loves you and you trust that he loves you. Just like the sheep trust the shepherd that he will take care of them. The bottle babies trust that you will come feed them a bottle several times a day. They believe you're going to come. And the minute you open the barn door, they start bleeding. And they're like, oh, you're here, you're here. I know you came to feed me my bottle. I'm so excited. And you let them out of the pen and they're like, I'm not leaving your side. I'm going to stick with you the whole time. So there's just all this lovely imagery. And James is called out to the farm again one night, and there's a ewe that's giving birth, and things are not going well. And he checks out what's happening, and he realizes she has twins, and they've both died, and was like, she's going to have to give birth to these twins, but she's had a really hard time of it, and she's really struggling. And sheep are sort of like this. They give up really easily, which is partly why I think the Bible compares us to sheep, as we are discouraged easily. We often just want to lay on the ground and be like, I'll just lay here, forget it. I won't keep going. This was too hard. And sheep are like that. They really are. They give up hope really easily. And so she's just struggling. She's had a difficult time, and now she's grieving. And James is like, oh, I don't think she's going to make it unless we do something. And he says, let's do this old farmer's trick where we take one of the bottle babies and we put it on her, and she accepts it as her own. And it's like a win-win. Then the bottle baby has a mother and the mother has a baby. And this works a lot of the time. And the farmer's like, well, I would do that, except I haven't had any bottle babies lately. And so there isn't anybody, because when you do this trick, it usually has to be like a newborn baby. It has to be really little. So she knows, like, oh, okay, this is a newborn baby. And as he's saying this, Herbert is popping around the flock trying to get a drink of milk here and there. And James looks at him and he's like, oh, there's Herbert. And he's really little. He's like a little runt because he's not getting enough milk. So even though he's older, he's really tiny and he's looking malnourished. And he says to the farmer, what about Herbert? And the farmer's like, well, Herbert's too old. And James says, well, he's pretty underweight. I actually don't think he's going to make it out in the field like this. I think we should try this. And otherwise, he's going to have to be a bottle baby because this isn't cutting it. He's not put on enough weight. So they say, okay. So they take the smell of the dead babies and they rub it on Herbert. And then they give Herbert to the mother. And Herbert, of course, is like, yeah, this will be great. I'm glad to get some milk anywhere. And lo and behold, the mother accepts Herbert, even though he's like several weeks old. So it's kind of an unusual circumstance. And she accepts Herbert as her baby. And Herbert fully accepts her as the mother. And James is like, this is great. And he goes home and he's called out to the farm, sometime later, and they're talking. And he says to the shepherd, hey, how'd that ever work out with Herbert? And I like this part too, because he says that Rob's the farmer. Look, Rob cried, there's that ewe with Herbert over there, right there in the middle of the bunch. They all looked about the same to me, but Rob, like all shepherds, they were as different as people, and he picked the two out effortlessly. I also love this because look at all these people in the world, yet God knows us all. He can pick us all out. He knows the hairs on our head. The intimacy with which God knows us is like a shepherd knows his flock. He knows the personalities of the different sheep. Even though all these sheep look exactly alike, he can look out and say, oh, that's Herbert. Like James couldn't do that. So he's like, oh, I want to go over and see them. They were near the top of the field. And as I wanted to have a closer look at them, we maneuvered our way to that corner. The ewe, fiercely possessive, stamped her foot as we approached. And Herbert held close to the flank of his new mother. He was, I noticed, faintly obese in appearance. You couldn't call him a runt now, Rob said, and laughed. Nope, I guess not. By God, he's a clover in the little youth, and I reckon he saved that youth's life, for she'd have pegged out by now, but she's never looked back once he came along. And James just is in awe over how this little orphan lamb who was rejected by his own mother and had to kind of scrap to survive finds this ewe who also needs somebody, and they're put together, and it's this like beautiful relationship. And what's funny is Herbert went from being malnourished and probably not going to make it, and he ends up getting adopted by this mother, and she was going to have twins, so she had double milk. So Herbert ends up getting a double portion, and he's actually kind of pudgy, which is great for a little lamb, I suppose. And I just love that imagery of us. We are just trying to make it in the world. We are scrapping by. We're like, oh, maybe I'll find meaning here. Maybe I'll find purpose here. Maybe it's this relationship. Maybe it'll be this vice. Maybe it'll be money, or maybe it'll be beauty, or maybe it'll be fame. And we're just kind of scrapping around in the world, trying to get little hits of nourishment off all these wrong things that don't love us. Those other mothers did not want Herbert. They kicked him away. And those other things that we try to chase after, that we think, maybe this will be it. Maybe this will fulfill me. And it's not enough, and we don't get enough, and we get kicked away and away, and we're actually starting to atrophy. We're not getting enough. But when we find like the real love, when we find God, when we find the real purpose, we actually get a double portion. We get a double portion, just like Herbert did. Not only do we get eternity and salvation and security, we get to walk with God in this lifetime. We get all the milk we need, right? We get his word. We get to talk to him. We get the fruits of the Spirit. The Holy Spirit lives inside of us. And then we can give selflessly, right? We can go out and say, I actually have a double portion in life. I know where I'm going in eternity, but I also am walking with the Good Shepherd right now. And I get fed enough for two, and I have enough to share with you. And I just thought these stories went together so perfectly, of the giving of the excess, giving that double portion away. We're so blessed spiritually once we come to the Lord, once we find that source that loves us and accepts us, we get a double portion, and we have enough to share, just like little Herbert had too much almost. What a blessing, what a beautiful thing. And James just kind of marvels at that. And it just makes me think of how the Good Shepherd loves us, in that we get to know his voice and be called by him, and we get a double portion of blessing, so much so that we can share with others, and we can give to others, and we can further God's kingdom. This is a dark, dark world we live in, and we have the light source. Once we become Christians, once we find God, once we give our lives over, we are also the light, and we can share it and share our blessings. And it's just illustrated perfectly in these stories. And I'm going to leave you with Psalm 23, and you can think of little Herbert in this. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I hope you carry these images of this little lamb with you, and who you are in God, and that that double portion, like he says, we're anointed with oil and our cup runneth over. When we find the Lord, when we come into communion with him, our cup runneth over. And if you're someone who doesn't quite know what that means, I encourage you to reach out to me. I would love to talk to you, or find someone you know who's a Christian or a church, or look something up and understand what that means. And if you're someone that is already saved, but maybe you're feeling like your cup is dry and you're struggling, I encourage you to get in the Word, to get in community, to join a church, and to study what this looks like. We can get kind of lost like the little sheep, and just keep coming back to the Good Shepherd. Listen for his voice and read this psalm maybe once a week. Just sit and read it and meditate on it and think about what these words mean and who we are as the little lambs and who God is as the Good Shepherd. So I leave you with those images, and I pray for you as my audience. I love that you listen. I appreciate your support, and I also pray for you, and I pray over all these podcasts, and I would love it if you prayed for me and prayed over this podcast also, and I look forward to next time. I'm so glad you joined me today on the French Press. If you liked what you heard, you should follow me. That way you'll get all the latest episodes. And if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to rate the show. Also, if you'd like to follow my blog, The Demi-Tasse Drafts, I have a link below in the show notes. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Anytime you can leave a like, comment, reshare a post. All these help my ministry get more traction. The most important thing you can do is pray. I really appreciate all of your support. Thank you for sharing a French press with me today.